They were legends in Hollywood. They built their lives on stories. But in the end, their own story became the darkest one ever told. It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday in Brentwood, the kind of day where celebrities sip green juice, nannies walk French bulldogs, and nothing bad ever happens in public. But behind the hedges of a $13.5 million estate, a nightmare was brewing. A nightmare so brutal, so personal, and so unbelievable that when the truth began to surface, even the seasoned homicide detectives stopped in their tracks. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Rob Reiner, dead. Michelle Singer, dead. Multiple stab wounds. Blood everywhere. The kind of scene that doesn't just shock, it haunts. But what truly chilled investigators wasn't just the carnage. It was what came next. Because this wasn't a random robbery. This wasn't a break-in. This was something far more twisted, and it came from inside the house. And if you're wondering how that can be possible, you're not alone. You see, the suspect wasn't a masked intruder or an obsessed fan. It was Nick Reiner, Rob's own 32-year-old son. A man who grew up surrounded by fame, wealth, and adoration. A man who once walked red carpets and shared studio space with Hollywood royalty. But by the night of December 14th, Nick had become something else entirely. A man arrested for double homicide, charged with stabbing his parents to death. And that's not all. Tracy Reiner, Rob's adopted daughter, yes, the daughter of iconic actress Penny Marshall, was also arrested. Not as a bystander, not as a grieving sister, but as an alleged accomplice. The headline alone feels impossible, doesn't it? Reiner children kill Reiner parents. But this isn't fiction. This isn't a movie script. This is real. And what Tracy and Nick would later accidentally reveal, through voicemails, interviews, and one shocking conversation caught on a forgotten dashcam, would shake everything the world thought they knew about the Reiner legacy. What were they hiding? What did they fear Rob and Michelle would tell? And how did an entire Hollywood family implode without anyone noticing the cracks? We're going to take you deep inside the story no one in the industry wants to touch. Because this isn't just about a brutal crime. It's about the psychology of family betrayal, the deadly collision of trauma, inheritance, and legacy, and how something so perfect on the outside can rot to the core from within. And at the center of it all, two people who claim to love their parents. Two people who may have carefully orchestrated every last detail of their murder. And yet, in one careless moment, gave it all away. Let's rewind. December 14th, 2024. A sunny afternoon in Los Angeles. Nothing strange. No signs of forced entry. No reports of domestic disturbance. Number 911 calls until much later. At 6:17 p.m., emergency services received a frantic call from Romy Reiner, 27, the youngest daughter of Rob and Michelle. Sobbing. Panicked. Almost incoherent. But 6 words stood out. They're dead. In the bedroom. Blood. Police arrived at the Brentwood mansion within minutes. They entered through the rear patio doors. And what they found inside still hasn't been fully revealed to the public. But what has been leaked? The official autopsy labeled the deaths as homicide by multiple sharp force injuries. There were signs of a struggle. Defensive wounds. Blood splatter consistent with close-range stabbing. The victims didn't go quietly. Michelle had cuts on her forearms, indicating she tried to shield herself. Rob was found with deep trauma to the chest. A wound so severe it nearly pierced through his spine. There were no signs of robbery. No valuables missing. No broken windows or force locks. This wasn't a theft. It was personal. It was calculated. It was intimate. But here's where things start to unravel in the most chilling way. Nick Reiner was living in the guest house. That's right. He was on the property, just a stone's throw from the main house, at the time of the murder. In fact, his alibi? He told police he slept through the whole thing. But something about that didn't sit right. Not with the officers. Not with the coroner. And certainly not with Romy. Because when Romy arrived at the home, just after 6 p.m., she swears she saw movement in the guest house window. A shadow. A light flicker. Someone watching her. She told police, "It's Nick. He's not answering. Something's off." And according to arrest records, when detectives approached the guest house, Nick opened the door with scratches on his forearm and blood on his left shoe. His response? He said he had a nosebleed earlier. A nosebleed. From there, things escalated fast. Police brought Nick in for questioning. At first, he was calm, confused, cold. But when he was informed about the blood pattern evidence and the possibility of DNA under Michelle's fingernails, he stopped speaking. For 6 hours, Nick remained silent. Not a word. Until he asked for Tracy. Yes, Tracy Reiner, who didn't even live at the estate. Within 24 hours, she too was arrested, charged as a co-conspirator. And from there, the story got even darker. Because during a break in questioning, a break during which Nick and Tracy were temporarily placed in the same hallway for transfer, a security camera picked up their whispered conversation. They weren't supposed to fight, Nick muttered. It's okay, Tracy whispered. We'll just say it was self-defense. We'll say they came at us. They won't know what we found. What? We found. Those 3 words. They became the anchor of the entire investigation. Because what did they mean? What did Nick and Tracy find that led them to commit one of the most brutal crimes in Hollywood history? A document? A diary? A recording? Even the detectives couldn't agree. But Romy? She had her theory. And when she told police, it turned everything upside down. Because she claimed that Rob was preparing to cut someone out of the will. He had contacted a lawyer days earlier. She saw the calendar reminder pop up on his iPad. It said, "Meet with the state attorney, amend legacy." And who stood to lose the most? Nick and Tracy, especially if the rumors were true that Rob had found proof of theft, or worse, evidence of a long-hidden family secret involving one of the children. But before investigators could fully unpack that theory, something else surfaced. A voicemail, left accidentally on Tracy's own phone, left running while she and Nick thought they were alone. And in that message, barely audible but chilling to the bone, you hear, "Nick, I told you they'd never let us go. Tracy, then we had no choice." This wasn't a random explosion of violence. This was something festering, planned. And one slip-up, one forgotten voicemail, gave it all away. We've obtained transcripts, police reports, witness statements, even psychological profiles. And over the next hour, we're going to unpack every lie, every cover-up, and every breadcrumb they dropped before the storm. Because the truth behind the Reiner murders is more horrifying than anyone imagined. But just when you think it can't get darker, what Tracy whispered at the police station breaks the entire investigation wide open. And that's where we begin. What kind of person picks a Sunday, the calmest day of the week, to commit a double murder? And not just any Sunday, but one cloaked in perfect weather. Serene skies, birds chirping in Brentwood's elite enclave, Christmas lights blinking gently across perfectly trimmed hedges. It was December 14th. The sun rose over Los Angeles like it always did, golden, lazy, expensive. Rob Reiner had just made coffee in the kitchen. Michelle was still upstairs, folding winter sweaters she hadn't worn in years. They weren't expecting visitors. No film meetings. No red carpets. No Hollywood chaos. Just quiet. They deserved it, didn't they? After decades of living in the limelight, directing blockbusters, building an empire, raising children, they had earned their peace. But by 6:17 p.m., that peace would be shattered. Blood on the walls. Screams swallowed by 7,000 square feet of marble and silence. And not a single neighbor saw or heard a thing. Why? Because this murder was built on precision. Planned to the second. Orchestrated with eerie timing. Executed like a script. A final act no one would survive. But the story doesn't begin at night. No, it begins at sunrise. 6:12 a.m., Brentwood Estate security logs. Motion detected on the east side of the property. Nothing unusual, right? This was California. Squirrels. Gardeners. The occasional coyote. But this motion was human. A figure walking from the guest house toward the main residence. Nick Reiner. Wearing a hoodie. Hands tucked in his sleeves. No bag. No coffee. Just walking. Why was that strange? Because Nick never came over that early. Not once in the last 6 months. He was reclusive. Detached. A ghost drifting from one rehab center to the next before his parents brought him back to the estate. On one condition. He live in the guest house and stay clean. But on this morning, he wasn't just walking to say hello. According to internal house logs, a high-tech system Rob insisted on. The front door didn't open. Not even once. But the garage door did. From inside, someone used the secondary access. That access wasn't monitored by a camera, just a sensor. At 6:14 a.m., the garage door opened. At 6:16 a.m., it closed. 2 minutes. That's it. Enough time to step in, plant something, unlock something, or memorize something. Then Nick walked back to the guest house. Unseen, unbothered, untouched by sunlight. 9:23 a.m., Michelle texts Romy. Dad says bring flowers for dinner tonight. Hydrangeas if possible. Miss you. Sweet, right? A mother planning dinner. Nothing hinted at fear. Nothing sounded off. But when Romy showed this message to detectives later, they noticed something strange. Michelle didn't use emojis. Why does that matter? Because every other text she'd sent Romy for the past 3 years, every single one, included a heart, a smiley face, or at least a little flower. But not that day. It was stiff, formal, almost rehearsed. Was she texting under duress? Was someone watching her? Or was she trying to send a message without setting off alarms? The last text she ever sent would become a focal point in the investigation. Because it wasn't just a message. It was a breadcrumb. 12:47 p.m., Tracy Reiner arrives. No one knew she'd be there. She hadn't told Romy. Hadn't told friends. Didn't mention it in her social circles. She drove in, unannounced, using the private gate code she rarely used anymore. A black Audi, tinted windows. She parked behind the house, away from the cameras. Neighbors didn't see her, but someone did. A local dog walker later told police he saw a woman in a long beige coat walking quickly from the back toward the garage. He remembered because she was holding a folder. The color? Bright red. A strange detail, but meaningful, especially when no such folder was ever found during the search of the home. What was in that folder? Documents? Photos? Letters? Or something more damning? Something Michelle and Rob had held over Tracy, something she couldn't let escape? 1:15 p.m., family lunch, unconfirmed. Here's where the timeline starts to blur. Romy wasn't at the house yet. The housekeeper had the day off. There's no Uber Eats receipt. No security footage of deliveries. No incoming calls or texts. But on the kitchen counter, detectives found 2 used plates, 1 empty wine glass, and a broken teacup, the kind of cup Michelle always used. It was shattered on the tile floor. But here's the twist. The shards were placed in the trash neatly. Not swept. Placed. Intentionally. Like someone was cleaning up. Or covering up. So, what happened between 12:47 and 1:30? Did the conversation go sour? Was a confrontation already brewing? Or was this the moment Nick and Tracy began putting the plan in motion? 3:02 p.m. Last time Rob was seen alive. A neighbor across the street, a retired film editor named Hank Goodman, was walking his dog. He looked across and saw Rob standing in the garden near the fountain, talking on his phone. He waved. Rob waved back. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. 4:55 p.m., security camera interruption. The estate's internal system logged a 47-second interruption in the camera feed. Only one camera, the one watching the upstairs hallway. The master bedroom is just 10 feet down that hallway. Detectives found no power outage, no internet glitch, just one offline entry. Then normal function resumed. So how did it go offline? Someone would have to manually access the panel inside the hall closet to disable that specific feed. Meaning, someone inside the house at that moment had technical knowledge of the system. Or someone had help. Tracy? Nick? Both? And why did they choose that hallway? Because that's where the Reiners would later be found. 6:17 p.m., Romy enters the nightmare. Romy pulls into the driveway. She's holding a bouquet. Hydrangeas. Just like her mother asked for. She rings the bell. No answer. She tries the code. Door unlocks. She steps inside. The house is silent. She calls out, "Mom? Dad?" Nothing. She climbs the stairs slowly. Each step, a little more dread. She sees a door ajar. She walks in. And what she sees drops her to her knees. Blood. Everywhere. Rob's hand hangs limply off the bed. Michelle is face down on the rug. Romy screams. Calls 911. But just before the operator picks up, she looks down the hallway. Toward the guest house window. And she sees something. A figure. Standing still. Watching. She whispers, "Nick?" And then, just minutes later, police arrive. Guns drawn. Sirens wailing. They breach the main house. Then the guest house. And what they find inside isn't just a suspect. It's a web of lies about to collapse. Because Nick isn't panicked. He isn't crying. He isn't even surprised. He just looks up and says, "I thought I heard something." But what Nick said next, and how Tracy tried to cover it, would blow the entire case wide open. And the security footage no one was supposed to see? That's coming next. He looked calm, almost too calm. Nick Reiner sat on the edge of his couch in the guest house, legs spread, hands clasped, as though he were waiting for a meeting to start. Not like someone whose parents had just been butchered 30 yards away. No blood on his hands. No panic in his voice. Just a blank stare and a weak explanation. I thought I heard something, like glass or something. I didn't check. Detectives exchanged glances. One even wrote in their notes later. Body language didn't match trauma. No visible signs of distress. Why would a man, who claimed to love his parents, not even get up when he thought something shattered in the main house? He said he assumed it was just Romy being clumsy. He said it wasn't his place to get involved. He said he was highly medicated and hadn't slept well the night before. But the evidence was beginning to eat through every excuse like acid. Because inside that guest house, they found things. Horrible things. Exhibit A. A small, gray backpack. At first glance, it was harmless. But inside, a pair of latex gloves. A switchblade with dried residue. A single disposable phone, burner style. And a scribbled piece of paper with 4 words. TR 4 p.m. Done by 6. TR. Tracy Reiner. Nick later said, it stood for trash removal, and I wrote it down when I was high. But the timing? 4 p.m. Done by 6. That's the exact window investigators believe the murders occurred. Coincidence? Let's be honest. That's not a coincidence. That's a plan. Exhibit B. A fireplace with a burned notebook. Detectives noticed something odd. His fireplace, one he rarely used, was still warm. Inside were charred remains of something spiral-bound. They recovered scraps, and with digital reconstruction, they pieced together a partial page. If we wait longer, she'll figure it out. She's always watching. I'm sick of hiding. Signed simply, N. She. Who's she? Romy? Michelle? Someone else? And what was it they were hiding? Exhibit C. His shoes. Sitting by the guest house door were Nick's shoes. One pair, black leather, semi-worn. They looked clean, but under the soles, traces of blood. It had seeped into the crevices and hardened, likely missed in a half-hearted wipe. DNA results matched Rob Reiner. Nick's excuse? I stepped in something when I went to take out the trash. But detectives noted something else. The trash hadn't been taken out in 4 days. So what was he really doing? And more importantly, why did he try to lie about something so easily disprovable? The guest house, a house of ghosts. Let's rewind a bit. Nick didn't always live in the guest house. For most of his 20s, he was bouncing between treatment centers, sober living homes, and luxury rehabs in Malibu. At first, his parents supported the journey. They believed in second chances. But those second chances came with second mortgages on their trust. Nick had burned through nearly $1.8 million in rehab-related expenses. According to financial records leaked later, his parents were planning to cut him off. Not out of malice. Out of survival. Sources close to the family said Rob and Michelle were terrified of enabling Nick any longer. And Tracy? She'd been pushing for it. That's right. Tracy, the very person later accused of helping Nick carry out this crime, had, just months earlier, urged Rob to disown him. So what changed? The broken timeline. Investigators believe the turning point came 2 weeks before the murders, when something happened inside the guest house. No one knows what exactly, but neighbors reported screaming. Police were never called. But Michelle wrote in her journal, discovered post-mortem. Nick's rage is growing. The medicine isn't working. He speaks in riddles. He says Tracy gets it now. I don't know what that means. Tracy gets it now. Was that when the alliance formed? Was that when the fuse was lit? The Whisper Network. Let's talk about that one hallway moment. Security footage caught Nick and Tracy briefly whispering and holding. They weren't supposed to talk, but what they said was damning. Nick, they weren't supposed to fight. Tracy, it's okay. We'll just say it was self-defense. There was no panic in their voices. Only strategy. Like 2 people cleaning up a mess, not grieving one. Detectives believe this hallway exchange revealed everything. It showed intent. It showed collaboration. It showed calculation. But it also showed cracks. Because that whisper wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polished. It was real. And it opened a new line of investigation. The suicide letter that wasn't. 2 days after his arrest, Nick's attorney handed over a document Nick allegedly wrote before the murders. It was meant to be a suicide note, but it read more like a manifesto. You said I never did anything right. You made me into this. You told me I was a parasite. Now you'll know what that really means. But you'll never see it coming. That wasn't a goodbye. That was a declaration of war. A warning. But the timeline didn't fit. Because this letter was dated December 10th, 4 days before the crime. And yet, Nick was still seen attending AA meetings and laughing with his cousin at a brunch on December 12th. No signs of suicidal ideation, which led investigators to believe this wasn't a suicide note. It was a backup alibi. Something to muddy the timeline. Something to suggest mental break instead of premeditated murder. But if that's true, who helped him write it? Tracy? The journal in the closet. Here's where things take a bizarre twist. During a second sweep of the guest house, officers uncovered a small child's composition notebook hidden beneath a stack of old DVDs. Inside were 14 entries. Not dated. Not labeled. Just phrases. Like, they keep whispering in the walls. She knows about the second will. T's folder is the key. If they don't listen, we make them listen. They should have been gone years ago. Investigators believed this was Nick's writing, a kind of mental unraveling. But some experts suggested it was more than that. A plan, written in code. And the most disturbing entry of all. Kill the king and queen. Long live the new legacy. The king and queen being his parents? Was Nick trying to symbolically take the throne of the Reiner name? Was this about control? About rewriting his place in a family that had grown tired of cleaning up his mess? The missing trash bag. One final puzzle piece. Security cameras outside the guest house captured Nick on December 13th, the night before the murders. He walked to the edge of the property, near the back gate. In his hands, a large black trash bag. He tossed it into a neighbor's garbage bin, out of view. But when police checked the bin 2 days later, it was empty. Garbage had been collected the morning after the murders. And whatever was in that bag, gone. Forever. So what was in it? Bloodied clothes? The folder? A discarded phone? We may never know. But that detail still haunts the lead investigator. Because, as he put it, we think the truth was in that bag. We think that's what Michelle and Rob were about to expose. But if that bag held the key to the murders, then why did Tracy suddenly go dark the night before the crime? And where did she disappear for exactly 91 minutes, leaving no digital footprint? That's where we go next. What kind of daughter disappears for 91 minutes the night before her parents are killed and leaves no trace behind? No calls, no texts, no GPS pings, no credit card swipes, just a hole in time. And inside that hole, investigators believe, is where the truth was buried. Because Tracy Reiner didn't just vanish. She went somewhere. She met someone. And when she came back, everything changed. The public image of Tracy Reiner was carefully polished. Elegant. Soft-spoken. Private. She wasn't loud like some Hollywood children. She didn't chase cameras or stir controversy. She played the role of the composed adopted daughter perfectly. But behind closed doors, she was the family's archivist. The keeper of secrets. The one who knew where the documents were. The one Rob trusted with paperwork, storage units, and digital backups. And that's exactly why what she did next terrified detectives. The 91-minute gap. Let's break it down. On December 13th, at 6:42 p.m., Tracy's phone pinged near her apartment. At 6:43 p.m., it went dark. Airplane mode. It didn't turn back on until 8:14 p.m. 91 minutes. In Los Angeles, 91 minutes is an eternity. You can cross the city, meet someone twice, destroy evidence, or make a deal. So where was Tracy? Her statement was short. I went for a drive. I needed air. But investigators weren't buying it. Because when her phone turned back on, it wasn't near her apartment. It was 3 miles from the Brentwood estate. And not just anywhere. Near a quiet residential cul-de-sac. No businesses. No restaurants. No cell towers nearby except one. A place you don't accidentally end up. The red folder. Remember the red folder the dog walker saw earlier that day? That detail suddenly mattered a lot more. Because when police searched Tracy's apartment, they found something strange. A filing cabinet. Empty. Not partially empty. Completely empty. No documents. No folders. No paper residue. Just dust outlines where folders had once been. And on the bottom drawer, a red plastic tab. The kind used in office folders. The kind you don't accidentally misplace. Investigators believe Tracy had removed every document she'd been storing. Why now? Why that day? Unless she knew something was about to happen. Or unless she was helping make sure something never came to light. Tracy and the will. Here's a detail the public didn't hear until much later. Rob Reiner had 2 wills. The first was known. Standard. Evenly split. Trust-based. But the second? The second was sealed. Stored in a private safe. Only 2 people knew where the key was kept. Rob and Tracy. That wasn't speculation. That was confirmed by Rob's longtime attorney. And in the weeks before the murders, Rob had asked for that sealed will to be reviewed. Revised. Changed. Why? According to emails later subpoenaed, Rob had concerns about betrayal within the family. Betrayal. That word shows up again and again. And Tracy was right there when Rob started asking questions. Questions about missing money. Questions about altered documents. Questions about why certain expenses didn't add up. And who handled those files? Tracy. The shift. Friends noticed a change in Tracy about 3 weeks before the murders. She became withdrawn. Defensive. She stopped returning calls. And she began visiting Nick. A lot. This is important. Because before that period, Tracy and Nick were not close. Not enemies. But not allies. Yet suddenly, they were seen together at least 6 times in 10 days. Coffee shops. Parking lots. Short meetings. Always brief. Always tense. One witness described it as 2 people who hated each other but needed each other. Why? Because each had something to lose. Nick was facing financial exile. Tracy was facing exposure. And Rob? Rob was the fuse. The therapist who went silent. Here's where the story takes a darker psychological turn. Tracy had been seeing a private therapist for over a year. Sessions twice a week. The subject matter? Family trauma. Adoption resentment. Fear of abandonment. According to subpoenaed notes, Tracy believed Rob was preparing to erase her. Not emotionally. Legally. She feared being written out. And when she confronted him, the therapist wrote, client reports Rob dismissed her concerns and accused her of playing games with documents. Client feels threatened. Threatened? By a man in his late 70s? Or by the truth he was uncovering? Now here's the part that sends chills. 2 days after the murders, detectives tried to contact that therapist. No response. A week later, the therapist's office phone was disconnected. And within a month, the therapist had relocated out of state. No forwarding information. No public statement. Gone. Coincidence? Or someone who knew too much? The guest house packed. Let's go back to Nick for a moment. Nick trusted Tracy. Not because she was kind, but because she listened. When Nick spiraled, Tracy didn't lecture. She validated. She told him his parents were controlling. That they humiliated him. That they never gave him a fair chance. And slowly, that validation turned into something else. Agreement. Then encouragement. Then planning. Investigators believe Tracy didn't wield the weapon, but they believe she sharpened the motive. She reframed Rob and Michelle not as parents, but as obstacles. And once you see someone as an obstacle, removing them becomes easier. The deleted message. During forensic recovery, police uncovered fragments of a deleted text sent from Tracy to Nick the night before the murders. Only part of it could be reconstructed. It read, "Tomorrow is the last window. If we wait, he'll lock everything down." Everything. What is everything? The will? The money? The legacy? Or the truth? And Nick replied with just 3 words. "I'm ready now." The phone call nobody talks about. At 5:58 p.m. on December 14th. Just minutes before the estimated time of death, Tracy received a call. It lasted 18 seconds. From Nick. What was said? We don't know. But immediately after the call ended, Tracy sent a message to an unknown number. Content unrecoverable. Then she turned off her phone again. This time for hours. The arrest. When police finally arrested Tracy, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She asked one question. Did he say anything? Not, are they okay? Not, is this a mistake? Just, did he say anything? That question haunted detectives. Because it suggested she wasn't worried about Rob or Michelle. She was worried about Nick talking. And maybe what he might reveal. The whisper that changed everything. During processing, Tracy leaned toward an officer and whispered something she thought no one else could hear. But body cams caught it. Barely audible. 3 words. He forced us. Who is us? And forced them to do what? That whisper didn't align with self-defense. It didn't align with shock. It aligned with justification. And justification only comes when someone believes they had no other choice. But choice is always there, unless you've already crossed the line. And just when investigators thought they had Tracy figured out, they found something inside the estate safe. Something she didn't have time to destroy. Something dated one day before the murders. Something that explains why Tracy disappeared for 91 minutes. And why Nick was suddenly ready. Because the second will wasn't just about money. It was about exposure. And once we open that safe, nothing stays buried. How do you walk into your childhood home and find your parents lying in pools of their own blood? That's the question Romy Reiner has to live with. Not just once. Not just for a headline. But every single day. Because it was Romy, 27, screenwriter, quiet observer, youngest child, who stumbled into the crime scene that turned her family name into a crime statistic. And what she saw? It didn't just traumatize her. It opened the floodgates to everything investigators needed. And everything they never expected. 6:17 p.m., the 911 call. The transcript begins with a scream. Then Romy's voice. Broken. Rushed. Barely breathing. My parents there? I think they're dead. I'm at the house, Brentwood. Oh my God. There's blood. There's blood everywhere. Please come now. Please. The dispatcher tries to calm her. Asks the address. Asks if the scene is secure. Asks if anyone else is in the home. Romy responds with something chilling. I saw someone. I think it was Nick. I think he was watching me. That one line redirected the entire investigation. Because up until that moment, no one was sure who could have done it. But Romy? She pointed inward. At her own brother. The first officer on scene. Brentwood PD officer Haleen Gwynn arrived first. Her body cam footage was later leaked in court documents. What it shows is unforgettable. The front door swinging open. Romy collapsed on the marble floor, hands covered in what would later test positive for her mother's blood. And upstairs? Silence. Until the officer reached the master bedroom. Jesus Christ, she whispers into her radio. We've got 2 DOAs. Multiple lacerations. It's a goddamn bloodbath. Rob Reiner was on the bed, one hand dangling. His face turned toward the door. Eyes open. Michelle was on the floor, face down, blood pooling around her head. The carpet soaked. The walls sprayed. But no weapon. And no sign of forced entry. Just destruction. The positioning. Here's where things get stranger. Rob was stabbed 6 times. Michelle? 11. Overkill. And not just randomly. The wounds were targeted. Deliberate. Close range. A forensic analyst later testified. The attacker didn't just want them dead. The attacker wanted them to suffer. But the real twist? Michelle's left hand was clutching something. Tight. Investigators had to carefully peel her fingers back. Inside. A button. A small, black, mother-of-pearl button. Later confirmed to have come from a men's hoodie. And guess who had worn a black hoodie earlier that morning? Nick. Romy's statement. Once calmed and medically cleared, Romy gave a statement to detectives. She recounted the full timeline. She had spoken to her mom at 9:30 a.m. Everything seemed normal. She spent the day out riding and shopping for the hydrangeas her mom wanted. At 6 p.m., she arrived at the house. Then her voice cracked. She described walking in, calling out. Smelling something strange, metallic, she said. Not like perfume. Not like food. Blood. Then she climbed the stairs. She saw her father first. Then her mother. Then, out of the corner of her eye, movement. From the direction of the guest house. She didn't get a good look. Just a shadow behind the blinds. But in that split second, she said she knew. It was him. I felt it. It was Nick. Watching. Standing still like he didn't know what to do now that I saw him. The bedroom clue. Detectives found something odd in the master bedroom. A single, fresh fingerprint on the brass doorknob. It belonged to Tracy. Tracy claimed she hadn't entered that part of the house in days. But her print was fresh. Oil-rich. Unsmudged. Meaning she had touched it after Michelle had last cleaned it. Something Michelle did obsessively every morning, according to her housekeeper. So why lie? Why say she hadn't been there? Unless she didn't want to be tied to what happened behind that door. The whispered words. Here's what no one talks about. In her interview, Romy said something that prosecutors initially dismissed. But later, it became a bombshell. My mom said something before she died. I heard it when I came in faint, but she said it. What were the words? Romy leaned in and whispered them to detectives. He made us. 3 words. He made us. That phrase became the cornerstone of the prosecution's theory, because it suggests Michelle wasn't just a victim. She was coerced, complicit in something, or perhaps trying to confess something on her last breath. But the he in question? Was it Nick? Was it Rob? Was it someone else? Romy insisted it was Nick. She said her mother had become paranoid in the days leading up to the murder. She believed Nick was manipulating Tracy, and that they were planning something. She even confided in Romy just 3 days before her death. Your brother scares me. But what's worse is your sister defends him. The envelope in the desk. In the aftermath, while the estate was being processed, detectives found a sealed envelope in Michelle's writing desk. It was addressed to her lawyer. Inside, a single-page letter. It read, I'm scared. I think something's happening behind my back. I've made a mistake trusting Tracy with the documents. If anything happens to me, start with Nick. He's getting worse. Check the second will. That letter was dated December 10th, just 4 days before the murders. Back to the scene. The master bedroom didn't just contain blood and bodies. It contained a story. Broken glass near the nightstand, a photo frame shattered, 1 shoe missing from Michelle's foot, and Rob's phone placed on the nightstand, screen cracked, battery removed. That's right, the battery was removed. Why? To prevent any GPS tracking, to erase any chance he could call for help, to erase evidence. That wasn't an accident. That was premeditated. Whoever did this wasn't panicking. They were cleaning up, methodically. But the real horror came when investigators pulled footage from the hallway camera outside the bedroom. Because what they saw changed everything. What can a dead body tell you that the living won't? In this case, everything. Because while the Brentwood mansion screamed of chaos, blood, shattered glass, broken lives, it was inside the sterile silence of the county coroner's office that the real horror began to take shape. The autopsy report didn't just confirm the murder. It exposed the rage behind it, the intimacy, the intent, and one single word buried deep in the findings would force detectives to reclassify the crime from just brutal to deeply personal. The autopsy timeline. Rob and Michelle Reiner's bodies were transported from the scene the night of December 14th. By the following morning, a full team of pathologists was assembled. Why such urgency? Because this wasn't just a homicide. It was a high-profile homicide. And with the media already circling like vultures, the department knew they had to get answers fast before rumors swallowed the facts. Rob Reiner's body. Let's start with Rob. Cause of death? Multiple sharp force injuries to the chest and upper abdomen. Total wounds, 6. But not just 6 random stabs. Each one was strategically placed. 2 to the sternum, 1 to the liver, 1 between the 6th and 7th rib, aimed directly at the heart. 2 superficial slices across the upper arms. Those last 2? Defensive wounds, meaning he tried to fight back. But the real bombshell? There were hesitation marks. Small, shallow cuts, just barely breaking the skin around the first major wound. What does that suggest? The killer hesitated, not out of remorse, but from nerves, like someone who had never done this before, someone who was acting, not reacting. That small detail would become a key argument in court, because it proved premeditation, not impulse. Michelle Singer Reiner's body. Now to Michelle. Her body told a different story. Cause of death? Sharp force trauma to the neck and face. Total wounds, 11. Let that number sit for a moment. 11 stab wounds. More than Rob. More chaotic. More emotional. But what chilled the room was this. 3 of those wounds were to the face. To the mouth. That's not just violence. That's symbolic. Forensic psychologist Dr. Eliza Romero explained. When a killer targets the mouth, they are often trying to silence the victim. It suggests rage towards something the victim said or planned to say. So what was Michelle about to say? What truth was she carrying that someone wanted erased? Remember the note she left in her desk? I've made a mistake trusting Tracy with the documents. Was that the secret? And was Michelle about to blow everything open? The knife that wasn't there. Both victims were killed with the same type of weapon. That much was clear. Wounds were consistent with a 5 to 6-inch serrated blade, likely from a kitchen set. But here's where things twist. The entire knife block in the Reiner kitchen was present. All knives accounted for, except one, the bread knife. Now ask yourself this. Who takes a bread knife upstairs? And more importantly, who puts the rest back? Because that's what happened. The drawer had been wiped. No fingerprints. No smudges. Just one clean empty slot. So someone didn't just grab a knife in a rage. They selected one. They returned the rest. And they cleaned up after themselves. That's not a frantic killer. That's someone who planned the aftermath before the crime even began. Traces of sedative. Toxicology revealed a low but detectable amount of a sedative in Rob's system. Not enough to knock him out, but enough to dull reaction time, to make a fight harder, to make escape impossible. The drug? Zolpidem, commonly known as Ambien. But here's the twist. Rob didn't have a prescription. Michelle didn't either. Nick did. Blood trails and drag marks. Though both bodies were found in the master bedroom, spatter analysis showed movement during the attack. Specifically, Rob was attacked near the bathroom. Drag marks led to the bed. Blood patterns indicated someone tried to reposition the body. Why? One theory: to stage the scene. To make it look like the attack happened while both victims were asleep. But the blood trail told a different story. They were awake. They fought. And someone rearranged the crime scene to hide that fact. Again, not panic. Control. The fingerprint that didn't belong. Now here's the part that turned the case upside down. Among the blood-soaked bedding, investigators recovered a partial fingerprint. It wasn't Nick's. It wasn't Tracy's. And it wasn't Romy's. It was unmatched. To this day, it hasn't been identified. Male. Adult. No match in national databases. That raised a terrifying possibility. Was there a third person involved? Someone helping? Someone watching? Or was it a past print? From a visitor? Maybe. But unlikely. Because the print was fresh, meaning it came after the blood was spilled. The hidden bruise. On Michelle's back, a faint but distinct bruise was discovered. Oval. About the size of a fist. Low on the spine. It wasn't visible to the naked eye at the scene, but under infrared scans, clear as day. Pathologists believe it came from a blunt object impact before the stabbing, meaning someone tried to subdue her first. A scuffle. An argument. Something got physical. And then it escalated. One theory: she tried to flee, was stopped, struck, then silenced. The words etched in flesh. This part was withheld from the public for months, until court records forced its release. On Rob's shoulder, one final wound stood out. It wasn't deep, but it was deliberate. A carving. 3 letters. TR. At first, people assumed it meant Tracy Reiner. Too obvious, right? But some argued it could mean Times Run, or be a sick signature. But then came the voicemail. The one Nick left for Tracy at 3:17 a.m. on the day of the murders. Recovered from a backup file on Tracy's phone. Don't forget. TR. For sharp. Done by 6. TR wasn't just an alias. It was a signal. A code. A timeline. And now it was carved into flesh. Rob Reiner's flesh. As if to say, we did it. Or worse. This was always going to happen. The pathologist's final words. Dr. Amelia Brent, lead medical examiner, stood before the courtroom and said something unforgettable. In all my years, I've seen rage. I've seen crime of passion. I've seen revenge. But this was different. This was symbolic. This was rehearsed. And just when prosecutors thought the story ended in the blood, an envelope arrived at the DA's office. No return address. No fingerprints. Inside, a photo. A blurry still from a security camera no one knew existed. And in that photo, Nick and Tracy, standing together, in the hallway, at 5:52 p.m., exactly 18 minutes before Romy found the bodies. What happens when the pedestal crumbles? When a family name that once commanded respect in every Hollywood studio becomes the name whispered in shame. The Reiners weren't just another industry family. They were Hollywood royalty. Rob Reiner, actor, director, political voice, the creative mind behind Stand By Me, A Few Good Men, and The Princess Bride. His wife, Michelle Singer, film producer, philanthropist, the woman behind the curtain, holding it all together. And then there were the children. Nick Reiner, once the hopeful heir to Rob's creative legacy. Tracy Reiner, the adopted daughter of Penny Marshall, industry royalty in her own right. And Romy, quiet, private, the one now left to pick up the pieces. But on December 14th, it all collapsed. And the cracks had been forming long before the blood ever hit the carpet. The illusion of perfection. To the outside world, the Reiners were untouchable. Perfect marriage, perfect kids, perfect mansion in Brentwood. They smiled on red carpets. They posed for holiday spreads in Vanity Fair. They made speeches about love and integrity at fundraisers and award shows. But behind closed doors, there were whispers, unspoken griefs, internal rivalries, toxic loyalty, and secrets locked behind vaults and court orders. Because while Hollywood adored Rob Reiner, his own household was teetering on a fault line of dysfunction. Nick's rise and fall. Let's talk about Nick. Born into wealth, raised among legends, treated like the prince of the Reiner dynasty. He tried to follow his father's footsteps, wrote scripts, took meetings, even sold a semi-autobiographical screenplay about his struggles with addiction. For a while, it looked like Nick was going to make it. Then came the relapses, the erratic behavior, the rehab check-ins, the allegations of violent outbursts, never fully public, but circulated in hushed industry whispers. At least 3 production companies allegedly passed on projects tied to Nick, not because of the script quality, but because of Nick himself. Unpredictable, bitter, entitled. A former agent reportedly said off record. And Rob? He kept paying, kept hoping, until one day he stopped. Tracy's legacy complex. Now Tracy. Unlike Nick, she didn't want fame. She inherited it. Adopted by Penny Marshall. Raised by Rob Reiner. She didn't need to chase attention. She had it built into her bloodline. But that came with baggage. According to a former family therapist whose records were leaked during discovery, Tracy suffered from what's known as legacy identity diffusion. In short, she didn't know who she was, only who she was supposed to be. Daughter of icons, guardian of the Reiner image, but never her own person. And over time, that confusion turned to bitterness, especially as her father grew more distant, as Romy became the new favorite. As Rob reportedly sidelined Tracy from the family trust conversations and started leaning on Romy for more legal and estate matters. One former assistant put it like this: Tracy went from being the second in command to a ghost, and when the will surfaced, she was allegedly cut out entirely. The Hollywood reaction. When news of the double homicide broke, the industry froze. This wasn't just a celebrity scandal. It was a tragedy with a familiar name. Actors, directors, producers. They all reacted, but carefully. Some offered statements. Others deleted tweets. A few made bold declarations, then retracted them days later when the truth got uglier. Morgan Freeman, who had worked with Rob in the 90s, posted, "We lost a giant today, praying for his family." But when Nick's arrest was made public, the post vanished. Steven Spielberg released a one-sentence statement. A painful loss of friends and legends. I will withhold further comment out of respect. Ava DuVernay tweeted, Hollywood is broken, and sometimes the cracks show where the lights don't reach. But the most controversial reaction came from a leaked email from inside one of the top agencies, sent just 2 days after the murder. The subject line? Reiner Properties, pause all development. The fallout. Within 48 hours of the news breaking, Rob Reiner's unreleased documentary project was shelved. Tracy's pending executive producer deal was terminated. Nick's name was blacklisted across multiple agencies. The estate froze all assets pending court investigation. And just like that, the Reiner dynasty became radioactive. The Lost Projects. One tragic detail: Rob had been developing a memoir, his most personal project yet, tentatively titled Behind the Curtain. He'd only shared it with 2 people, Michelle and Romy. It was meant to be a raw, honest look at fatherhood, fame, and the cost of legacy. But according to Romy's statement to police, Rob had recently made a terrifying confession. He told me, if I publish this, it could end everything. But if I don't, I'll die knowing I hid the worst parts. What were those worst parts? Infidelity? Family secrets? Financial scandals? Or something deeper? Something connected to Nick and Tracy? Something that gave them motive? We may never know. Because the manuscript? It's missing. One printed copy, kept in a locked cabinet. Gone. Tracy's public silence. Since her arrest, Tracy has said almost nothing publicly. Her lawyers issued a brief statement. Ms. Reiner is devastated by the loss of her family. Any allegations tying her to this tragedy are not only false, they're malicious. But her courtroom demeanor told a different story. Cold, rigid, unaffected. a far cry from the woman who once played maternal roles in heartfelt films. In one court sketch, Tracy is seen staring at Romy across the aisle, stone-faced. No emotion, no recognition. And Romy? She won't look back. The legacy debate. In the wake of the crime, a question began circling among industry veterans. What do we do with Rob Reiner's legacy now? Can we still honor his work? Can we separate the art from the aftermath? Some say yes. Others argue his story can no longer be told without this ending. The media has already started recontextualizing his interviews, finding red flags, moments where he seemed to allude to cracks in the family. One quote from a 2019 interview suddenly resurfaced. "You never really know what's going on under your own roof until it's too late." Chilling, in hindsight. Romy's Instagram post. 2 weeks after the funeral, held privately, quietly, Romy posted something to Instagram. No caption, just a black and white photo of a childhood drawing. A stick figure family. Mom, dad, brother, sister, everyone smiling. But in the corner, a figure with no face. No label, no color, just empty. The post received thousands of comments, and Romy never responded to a single one. But sources say she's cooperating fully with prosecutors, and that she may testify. Hollywood loves a comeback story. But what happens when the story can't come back? When it ends in blood, betrayal, and silence? When the people who built the fairy tale destroy it from the inside out? We thought the industry would mourn. We thought the Reiners would be protected. But the silence? It's louder than we imagined. And just when the dust started to settle, a voicemail leaked. And in that voicemail, a voice we haven't heard before. A whisper that flips the case upside down. Sometimes the most damning evidence is the one you forgot you left behind. In a case bursting with bloody footprints, missing documents, and silent glances in courtroom hallways, no one expected a single voicemail to crack the story wide open. And yet, that's exactly what happened. It wasn't even discovered by police. Not at first. It came from a cloud backup, accidentally restored, unintentionally recovered. But once investigators heard what was on it, everything changed. The tone of the case, the direction of the charges, and perhaps most disturbingly, the understanding of motive. Because this voicemail wasn't just a message. It was a confession. And worse, it was never meant to be heard. The discovery. 2 weeks after Nick and Tracy's arrest, Romy handed over all her devices to law enforcement. Not just because she wanted to help, but because she was scared. She feared something was being missed. Something buried in the cloud. Investigators, working with digital forensics experts, began crawling through backups, emails, photos, app data, voice memos. And tucked inside a rarely used folder, marked simply 2FA recovery, was a synced audio file. Dated December 13th, 11:41 p.m. Titled, Voice Note 2. But it wasn't a voice note. It was a butt dial. Accidental. Unscripted. The phone had recorded 43 minutes of ambient conversation between Nick and Tracy. A conversation that was supposed to stay between them. A conversation that now blew their alibi apart. The transcription, partial. Forensic analysts worked around the clock to clean up the audio. What emerged was disturbing. The first few minutes were static, car sounds, a door slamming. Then voices. Tracy. They won't change it, Nick. I asked. I begged. Dad said he's already signed everything over. Nick. So what? We just wait while they screw us over again. Tracy. I'm not waiting anymore. Nick. Then it has to happen tomorrow. Tracy. 4 o'clock. That's the window. Nick. I can't look at her, Tracy. I can't. Every time I see her, I see the letter. The way she said it, like I didn't matter. Tracy, quietly. They took everything and smiled while doing it. Nick. We're not crazy, right? Tracy. No. They made us this way. What this reveals. The voicemail confirmed several things. Premeditation. It has to happen tomorrow. 4 o'clock. That's the window. This was not a moment of passion. This was planned. Motive. References to being excluded. Disinherited. Mocked. The letter likely refers to the second will Michelle hinted at in her journal. Shared blame. They made us this way. This isn't one unhinged person dragging another down. It's two people validating each other's rage. Time of execution. 4 o'clock. Matches the timeline of when security camera interference began. The implication. If this voicemail is real, and it's been authenticated, Then both Nick and Tracy walked into that house knowing what they were going to do. Not in the heat of an argument, not in reaction to a fight, but after days, possibly weeks, of silent, strategic build-up. This changes the nature of the crime from second-degree murder to first-degree conspiracy. And in California, that's the difference between life in prison and death row. Tracy's reaction to the voicemail. When confronted with the transcript during an evidentiary hearing, Tracy didn't blink. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She said 6 words. That was never supposed to exist. Not, it's a lie. Not, it's out of context. Just a quiet admission that the one thing she thought wouldn't come back to haunt her did. Nick's reaction. Nick, on the other hand, broke. The moment the voicemail was played in his hearing, his demeanor shifted. He rocked back and forth, covered his ears, muttered, "Stop, stop." It wasn't supposed to sound like that, but it did. And the jury heard it too. What the experts say. Legal analysts immediately latched onto the voicemail as the smoking gun, because not only did it verify motive and intent, it also proved collusion. Dr. Lynn Rosario, a forensic psychologist, said, "This wasn't a case of one dominant personality overpowering another. This was a psychological echo chamber. They fed each other's pain until it became justification. The letter that started it all." Here's where things take a darkly poetic turn. Remember when Nick said in the voicemail, "Every time I see her, I see the letter"? That wasn't just metaphor. Investigators believe he was referring to an actual, physical letter Michelle had left for him earlier that week. An informal notification that Rob and Michelle had updated their estate plan. It informed Nick that he would no longer receive inheritance funds unless he completed a 12-month verified sobriety program and passed quarterly psychological evaluations. In short, they weren't cutting him off. They were making him earn it. But to Nick, that was a betrayal. And that letter disappeared. The only reason detectives knew about it, Romy found a draft on Michelle's computer, but the signed copy? Gone. Possibly destroyed the night of the murders. The word that broke the room. There's one moment in the voicemail that left the courtroom stunned. Midway through, there's a long pause. And then Tracy says, softly, "If we do this, we become them." Nick doesn't respond. And then, a few seconds later, "Nick, no, we finally become free." That contradiction shattered public perception. They didn't act out of trauma. They acted out of vengeance. And they knew it. This wasn't healing. This was erasure. The final words of the voicemail. After 43 minutes of breathing, low murmurs, shifting tones, the voicemail ends with a chilling exchange. "Tracy, she'll fight." "Nick, then we don't give her the chance." Click. Silence. End of file. You can stage a crime scene. You can wipe blood off knives. You can even lie to your own sister. But you can't erase a mistake you don't know you made. And this voicemail? It was the Reiner siblings' mistake. The one mistake that now stands between them and the rest of their lives. And just when it seemed like the voicemail would be the final nail, detectives uncovered something else. A strange behavior pattern in the week leading up to the murders. Something Nick did that no one could explain. And when they followed that trail, they found a purchase that connected every dot. He looked calm, almost too calm. Nick Reiner sat on the edge of his couch in the guest house, legs spread, hands clasped, as though he were waiting for a meeting to start. Not like someone whose parents had just been butchered 30 yards away. No blood on his hands. No panic in his voice. Just a blank stare and a weak explanation. "I thought I heard something, like glass or something. I didn't check." Detectives exchanged glances. One even wrote in their notes later. Body language didn't match trauma. No visible signs of distress. Why would a man, who claimed to love his parents, not even get up when he thought something shattered in the main house? He said he assumed it was just Romy being clumsy. He said it wasn't his place to get involved. He said he was highly medicated and hadn't slept well the night before. But the evidence was beginning to eat through every excuse like acid. Because inside that guest house, they found things. Horrible things. Exhibit A, a small, gray backpack. At first glance, it was harmless. But inside, a pair of latex gloves, a switchblade with dried residue, a single disposable phone, burner style, and a scribbled piece of paper with 4 words. TR 4 p.m. Done by 6. TR. Tracy Reiner. Nick later said, "It stood for trash removal, and I wrote it down when I was high." But the timing? p.m., done by 6. That's the exact window investigators believe the murders occurred. Coincidence? Let's be honest. That's not a coincidence. That's a plan. Exhibit B, a fireplace with a burned notebook. Detectives noticed something odd. His fireplace, one he rarely used, was still warm. Inside were charred remains of something spiral-bound. They recovered scraps, and with digital reconstruction, they pieced together a partial page. If we wait longer, she'll figure it out. She's always watching. I'm sick of hiding. Signed simply, N. She. Who's she? Romy? Michelle? Someone else? And what was it they were hiding? Exhibit C, his shoes. Sitting by the guest house door were Nick's shoes. One pair, black leather, semi-worn. They looked clean, but under the soles, traces of blood. It had seeped into the crevices and hardened, likely missed in a half-hearted wipe. DNA results matched Rob Reiner. Nick's excuse? I stepped in something when I went to take out the trash. But detectives noted something else. The trash hadn't been taken out in 4 days. So what was he really doing? And more importantly, why did he try to lie about something so easily disprovable? The guest house, a house of ghosts. Let's rewind a bit. Nick didn't always live in the guest house. For most of his 20s, he was bouncing between treatment centers, sober living homes, and luxury rehabs in Malibu. At first, his parents supported the journey. They believed in second chances. But those second chances came with second mortgages on their trust. Nick had burned through nearly $1.8 million in rehab-related expenses. According to financial records leaked later, his parents were planning to cut him off. Not out of malice, out of survival. Sources close to the family said Rob and Michelle were terrified of enabling Nick any longer. And Tracy? She'd been pushing for it. That's right. Tracy, the very person later accused of helping Nick carry out this crime, had, just months earlier, urged Rob to disown him. So what changed? The broken timeline. Investigators believe the turning point came 2 weeks before the murders, when something happened inside the guest house. No one knows what exactly, but neighbors reported screaming. Police were never called. But Michelle wrote in her journal, discovered post-mortem.